Good morning. Good morning. Um, I got a message yesterday that somebody's waiting for the next chapter, and I'm always glad to hear that. So I thought it's about time that I get on to the next chapter. But first, let's get back to the riddles here. I got some answers for the riddles last week, and I'm sorry they were wrong. Um, which month has 28 days? Well, all the months have 28 days. Not just February, but all of them have 28 days. All right, now listen to this one carefully. Randy's parents have two children, Snap, Crackle, and what's the third name? Well, it's Randy, of course. Randy's parents. Randy is a child of his parents. He's one of the three children. So it's Snap, Crackle, and Randy. All right, so nobody won the riddles. That means that I'm going to have to take the Ford Mustang, 2021 Ford Mustang, and keep it for myself or put it back to the dealer because that was going to be the prize. Now, the prize for this week's riddle. Oh, first, Willie sent me a riddle. Okay, now here's the riddle. There are three doors. You have to open one of them. Behind one door is a shark who hasn't eaten for 50 years. Behind another door is a killer hornet. Behind another door is a ravishing coyote. Which door do you open first? Well, this one's pretty easy. Okay, Willie, ready? I'd open the door with a shark behind it because if it hadn't eaten for 52 years, it's dead. So behind that door is one smelly old shark carcass. And what's my prize? What do I win? Okay, so this week's riddle, there will be a prize. And it's going to be a very special prize. I was thinking of maybe something like a thoroughbred horse or something like that. So it'll be a very special prize for this week's riddle. Okay, are you ready for the riddle? All right. Here it is. I am very heavy going forward, but going backwards, I am not. What am I? Okay, there'll be a very special prize given for the answer to this riddle. But it's got to come direct to me, no third person stuff. Oh, tell Grandpa that I think it's... No. That doesn't work. It has to come direct to me with the answer, okay? That's the only thing I'll accept. All right? So, let's get out of the book. The Rope in the Jungle. We are on chapter 9. And Caleb and Trey are going down the jungle river with the witch doctor Don Trejo. And Don Trejo's an old withered old man, who's a witch doctor who decided to take this trip, which will be the last trip before he dies, down the river. And they're rowing a Kuroko down this river, and they're having a great time. But this chapter, there's a storm. Now, folks, I don't want to scare you, but a storm in the jungles of Chiapas is not something you take lightly. Because if this Kuroko tips over, there's nothing but alligators in the water, and Trey and Caleb will be eaten up. Now, we know that doesn't happen because they're the stars of the book, but it is possible maybe they could have a leg chewed off, or an ear, or an eyebrow, or something important like that. So stay tuned. That could happen. So this is going to be a scary chapter. Back to water. Well, I still have my bee spray, so I'll use that too. So, are we ready? All right, settle in. Put your head on the pillow and open your ears. Don't forget about the riddle. And here we go. At the top of the canyon cleft, they paused and set down their burdens, not so much to rest as to gape at the landscape. Don Teo was not winded at all. Trey was breathing was just a trifle deeper than usual, and even Caleb was not quite panting. Well, they're getting used to paddling, that's for sure. The rigors of the journey had already toughened them considerably, and slimmed his pudgy middle by an inch or so. Both he and Trey had long ago lost their city pallor, and were now nicely suntanned. Caleb's tan was particularly impressive, framed as it was by white hair and the fringe of a white beard. He had resumed trimming it and shaving the rest of his face every other night, heating his tin mess cup full of Keobila water, what the heck is that, over the brazier embers. He no longer, especially in comparison with the wizened Kekeke, looked so old or so small. But right now, he and Trey weren't appraising each other. They were looking down at the river, which seemed no bigger than a brook from up here, and out at the unbelievable, all-encompassing jungle. It stretched to the horizon in every direction, looking much as the sea had looked from the deck of the Godspeed. Below them there were the vertical gray slab sides of the canyon. At its bottom, the white of the river rapids, and in the spray of the turbulent water, a waving little rainbow. Everything else, everywhere else, was green. A mottled green of varying hues and tints of shades of green, but green. There was no end of it, no break in it, except the sinuous Usumacinta. It seemed incredible, impossible, that they or anyone else could ever cross that trackless green immensity. Trey absent-mindedly scratched his left palm, which had begun to itch, and glanced at Don Trejo. The Ancient One was not looking at the jungle, all too familiar to him, but at the sky. The Mexican heavens, clear blue for so long, were now full of great puffy white clouds with the gray bottoms. The gobs, like gobs of whipped cream on pewter platters. Don Teo grunted and conveyed to Trey in his pigeon Spanish that they had better hurry along, down to the riverside and the protection of the trees. I think I need a little honey here. All right. Ooh, that honey is good. It's expensive, but it's good. It looked to him, said the Kekaku, that as though the rainy season was going to go out with a tax Rex at Kakula. One last big bang. Not that there was any harm in their getting wet, but they must find shelter to keep their brazier fire alight. So they went on, down the other side of the rocky mountain, through which the Usumacinta had carved its canyon, and they picked their way down. Two things happened as they're picking their way down the mountain, back to the Usumacinta. If you remember, what they're doing is there's a waterfalls there, and they have to go around the waterfalls. Well, they can't paddle up the waterfalls because the water's coming down. So you can't paddle up a waterfalls, of course not. So what they do is they left their kawuka on this side of the river, and they're climbing the mountain, and then they're going to come down the other side and find somebody else's kruka that they left on the other side of the river, and that's what they're doing right now. Okay, back to the story. So they went on down the other side of the Rocky Mountain, though through which the Usumacinta had carved its canyon, and they picked their way down. Two things happened. For one, the innocent whipped cream clouds rapidly grew and towered high into the sky until they flattened out at the top into the unmistakable anvil shape of thunderheads. The other thing was that Trey's hand ceased itching and began to sting. Oh, it stings. That's Trey shaking his hand. But he was too occupied with following the kakaku to take time to examine it. By the time they were down to the river level again and under the jungle roof, Trey's hand had stopped stinging and was now burning. Whoa, his hand's on fire. More and more fiercely, Don Teo motioned for him and Mr. Crabtree to wait while he cast about for a secure shelter. Trey was privately thinking that the thick canopy of foliage above them ought to be umbrella enough against any rain, but he did not know the storms of the Chiapas. Already the sky was a leaden gray, and in mid-afternoon had become twilight, and under the trees it was full night. Trey sat down his luggage, to get a good look at the left hand. Whoa, he said as he looked at that hand. Now he remembered where he had previously heard the word Don Teo had used, and he remembered the words, "Your hand turns all plack and blue." Black and blue. It was indeed black and blue. Clear beyond the wrist and the palm, and fingers were covered with blisters ranging from the size of dimes to the size of silver dollars, but puffed up, round, and water-filled. Look at this hand Trey's got. Oh, it's so ugly. No, said the boy, beginning to feel a little trembly. It was the Tietjen tree. Captain Hootsma warned me never to touch one. He said if you don't get treatment right away, the poison gets in your system and you never get well again. My poor boy. I hate even to try to think where the nearest treatment might be. There's not a medical station within. I guess I'll have to be an invalid the rest of my life, Trey said, as bravely as he could. He thought he was going to have to chop off his hand. Oh, there goes Trey's hand. He's now handless. But I'll be happy just to stop the hurting. It burns like the dickens. Now your face has gone bright red. Caleb touched Trey's forehead. You're getting a fever, a bad one. Oh, I can feel that fever. Oh, my boy, what have I brought you to? Trey felt like sniffling in fright and self-pity, but he stifled that by saying, "It was all my fault, sir. You didn't." Then Trey appeared silently, almost magically, beside them. He glanced at Trey's hand and said only, "Come, come." They picked up the gear again and followed him away from the river, deeper into the jungle. At one place, the kakaku stopped briefly, pointed to a tree beside him, and said again, "Techachem." Then he pointed to a scrubby little bush alongside and said, "Julep, julep, Techachem, julep." He managed to make Trey comprehend that the julep was the only antidote for the poison of the Techachem, and that it always grew right next to the vicious tree. He went on at some length about how naughty the gods were to invent such a nuisance as the tetrachkin, but how considerate they were to see that the tulip also grew right where they needed it. And Trey would like a glass of water too, I'm sure. All right. He was interrupted by the crackling flash of lightning, visible even through the tree cover, and a rolling cannonade of thunder. Quickly, Don Teo slashed the machete through the stem of the tulip, picked up the bush and his other belongings, and beckoned Trey and Caleb to hurry after him uphill again. The Ancient One had found a cave. A cave. Or at least a clear place on the mountainside, shelved over by a tremendous flat slab of rock. They got under it just as the rain buckled down. You know, it probably is going to rain as hard as it did yesterday. I bet it is. They got under it to buckle down from the cloud thunder above, the tree leaf thunder below, and that they needed to scurry so fast. The downpour was drenching, but it drummed on the jungle canopy, and some minutes before it began to get through to the ground in scattered drops, then trickles, then a genuine rainfall, and a prodigious one. The cave's 3 occupants could barely see the river through the heavy gray veil of rain, except when the lightning came, brilliant, writhing, forking, jagging, snarling. Then the gray rain turned to crystal, and they could see all the way to the river's other bank, and miles of jungle in every direction. In these momentary blazes, the river's every branch, leaf, fern, and liana were etched in the exquisite detail of the steel engraving, and every tiniest leaf and frond was cascading so much rain that the jungle was no longer green, but silver. A silver that flashed back a reflection almost as blinding as the lightning itself. Then the light would instantly be gone, as if the following roar of thunder was a mighty hand swatting a kusunji. We'll go with kusunji. Okay. Like Caleb and Trey, almost forgetting his agonizing hand, watched his spectacle in awe and trepidation. The witch doctor was busy, heating a mess cup of water over the cooking brazier. He stripped the leaves from the cluster bush and dipped them in the hot water until they went limp. Then he took Trey's hand. He's taking Trey's hand there. All right. Then he took Trey's hand. We'll pretend this hand is Trey's hand. Okay? And then he took Trey's hand. Trey yelped and jumped and began to plaster it with the floppy leaves. Oh, it hurts. Carefully around each finger, around the hand, and well up beyond the wrist. Caleb, meanwhile, got out his flannel underwear and tore off several long strips. Don Teo received these with a nod and expertly bound them around Trey's hand to hold the leaves in place. Oh, my hand hurts. By Jove, muttered Caleb. Where did this backwoods savage learn to wind the gauntlet bandage and cast the surgeon's knot? Now the witch doctor also felt Trey's forehead and said something to the effect that he might as well stop that fever too. He slipped out of his paddy, ducked out from under the shelter, and disappeared as abruptly as the downpour had hammered him into the ground. Trey looked up from the swathed hand. It was feeling a bit cooler already and out at the river. Just another blaze of lightning lit up the world and showed him the most marvelous thing. There in mid-river stood a mermaid. She was waist deep in the water, so he couldn't see her tail, and somehow her face seemed indistinct. But in that brief glare, he could see her arm bent at the elbow. He could even see her fingernails glisten. A mermaid! And he could see what his arm was holding to her breast. A fish-tailed, human-torsoed little merbaby! A mermaid and a merbaby! Trey's exclamation was outshouted by the barrage of thunder that followed, but Caleb saw him start to his feet and bang his head on the rock slab above. Bang! Easy on, boy, said Mr. Crabtree. What's the matter? I'm a mermaid, stuttered Trey, his eyes as wide as he could get. He pointed towards the river. Mr. Crabtree, there's a mermaid floating out there in the water. Steady, lad, said the elderly gentleman, soothing. You got a high fever, and probably a lump on your head now to boot. No, sir, it was a mermaid, Trey babbled, with a baby in her arms, a mer-baby. Or a mer-cub, or whatever you'd call it, right out there. I never would have believed. Sit down, son, said Caleb, evidently beginning to be alarmed. The doc will be back in a minute with some more medicine. But it was, I tell you, Trey insisted. Look where I'm pointing, and wait for the next flash of lightning. The next flash came just then, and there she was, the mermaid, floating serenely, as if she was enjoying the fresh rain, along with the time spent in the muddy river. She shifted the baby gently from one arm to the other. Then the light was gone again, and the thunder shook the jungle. Did you see her? Did you see her, sir? You saw a mermaid. Now, wasn't that an honest-to-God mermaid? You can't say it wasn't. Aye, lad, I saw her, said Caleb, though calmly. I've seen one before. Trey goggled at him. In the Boston Aquarium. They got a mermaid in the Boston Aquarium? Trey's voice was practically a squeak. They got a manatee. What you just saw. But you're right, Trey. That animal is what started the legend of the mermaid. It's related to the whales and the other land animals that took to the water. The manatee lives in the fresh waters. It has a cousin, the dugong, that lives in the sea. Both of them are air-breathing mammals, like the whale, and so they are often seen on the surfaces. But she had arms, elbows, fingernails. Not really. Just the vestiges of what they were, claws or hooves a million years ago. But joined forelimbs. Aye, the manatee more or less kept its front legs, instead of letting them turn into flippers, the way the whales have. But did you see the thing's face? No, said Trey. I couldn't quite make it out. Well, if you ever get a close look, you'll see it's enough to scuttle the legend of the beautiful mermaid. The manatee has a face that only a walrus could love. Oh, said Trey, sounding rather dashed. I'm sorry if I spoiled a pretty fancy, my boy. But Trey wasn't listening. He was thinking. He had heard so many impossible stories from Captain Hootsma and the Zeu sailor from Balthazar of the marvels and oddities and the hazards to be found in these jungles, that he had taken them all to the grain of salt, but within the space of a few hours he had painfully proven the existence of the evil Tetchkan tree, and had seen the closest living thing to a mermaid. How many more of these wild stories would there see to come true? And if and when they did, would he survive the experience? Oh my goodness, this is getting scary. For the moment, Trey felt a twinge of homesickness and a longing for the soft, safe security of his hacienda. A divided conscience seemed to be arguing with two voices inside his head. "You have now seen the immensity of this jungle," Trey said, one voice. "In the vastness, what does a rope, even a 4-mile-long rope, amount to? No more than a piece of string lost in the grass of your hacienda's big lawn. It is ridiculous for old Mr. Crabtree, even more so for you, to be making this perilous trek on account of a piece of string." "But," argued the other voice, "somebody and something is depending on that rope and relying on Mr. Crabtree to fix it. That is Mr. Crabtree's job, and he will not shirk it or turn back." "Let him go, then," resumed the first voice. "Isn't it your responsibility, Trey, to be at home, comforting your lonely sister?" "Lonely," scoffed the second voice, "with a house full of devoted servants? With that young man Horner only too eager to keep her company and show off his ability by helping manage a plantation?" Trey laughed at himself and shook his head at the silence of the voices. He certainly must be feverish, he realized. Oh, excuse me. Grab some water. Good thing there's no alligators in that water glass. Trey laughed at himself and shook his head in silent voices. His silence must be feverish, he realized. It wasn't his conscience he had been hearing. It was a small stirring of fright, fear of what might lie ahead of them, and frightened he would not be. Caleb Crabtree had a responsibility, and Caleb was his. Trey Clark's responsibility. He could not let the rope maker go on alone and unprotected, because Trey was impelled by the curiosity far stronger than any fear, and he suspected that deep inside Mr. Crabtree there was also a young boy, not so much dedicated to duty but filled with wonder. Both of them, Caleb and Trey, would go on, if for no other reason than their consuming curiosity to find out what lay at the end of this journey. At this moment, Don Teo returned, a walking puddle, and brandished a handful of dripping herbs. "Kakanza kakate," he said, exclaiming that this meant herb of the sun god Keiko, and threw the leaves into the now boiling cup of water on the brazier. He regretted, he said, that he hadn't brought a dead man's tooth for the patient to suck on. A dead man's tooth? Oh, but this brew would have to do. When the leaves had turned the water and the color of tea, he bade Trey to drink it. Drink it. The stuff tasted something like diluted tobacco juice. Trey would almost have preferred the dead man's tooth. The lightning and the thunder diminished and died, but the rain poured down all night. There being no place to sling their hammock, Trey and Caleb rolled up their serapes, and Don Teo took in his patty. So when the bright washed morning woke them, they all got up rather stiffly from the hard rock beds. But Trey's fever was entirely gone, and when the witch doctor removed the bandage from the julep leaves, Trey saw that his hand was back to normal size and color, with no sign even of the blisters having broken. They were simply gone. Trey said Mr. Crabtree looked at the Ancient One with new respect. All right, that's the end of that chapter. Don't forget about the riddles. And next time we get on to chapter 10. All right. So long. Let me find the office.